Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 138. I hope you'll let us know where you're joining from. And we always want to hear your questions and comments as we go along. And Anton, you want to open up our topic for the day?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Today, we're going to talk about happiness. What it is, what does happiness mean to you? We can look at it from a scientific standpoint. We can look at it just from personal experience standpoint. To me, happiness is not just something that we think in our heads, right? Like you often hear me say, chemicals create thoughts and thoughts create chemicals. So to start out, really like before we even dive into a discussion, I want to see what it means for you to be happy, right? From audience standpoint, like what does it take for you to be happy, or maybe what does happiness mean to you? Any of those takes, like write them down in the comments so we can discuss because I don't think it's a right or wrong answer. I don't think there is any wrong answer, right? Like happiness is individual to an extent, right? So Kev, what is happiness to you, man?
Um, Happiness for me is, I like to really prefer the word joy, and it's a state of being, knowing that um, I am where I'm supposed to be, being and doing what I am supposed to do. Um, but most of all, just being who I'm designed to be.
And I like that you said it's a state of being, right? Like it is a snapshot, right? Like in a
Mm,
moment of time, with all things in consideration of that moment, we are happy, right? Like, but small things can change, and that can be, the happiness could be taken away, or it could be shifted very, very rapidly. But for me, in general, happiness is two part, right? Part one is what we mostly think about, and I think to me, I would interpret it as our current interpretation of our situation is a positive
mm,
one, right? Like, um, if my current interpretation of my situation is positive, I'm happy. And it doesn't mean situate. Notice the word situation, right? We can put many different types of words in there. Uh,
right.
we, our current environment, our current perception of what we're experiencing and things like that. But it's how we think about what's happening in our
Hmm.
life right now, what's happening in our relationships, what's happening at work, what's happening with our personal life, things like that. So that's part one. Part two is happiness is a chemical balance,
Mm,
meaning that we have the right amounts of chemicals in the right ratios and proportions to where they should be. And the thing is, they cause each other, they either support each other, right? If you have good chemicals, it's going to support your perception of that snapshot, right? Of assessment of that of time. Or if you already have a good perception of things that are happening in your life and how things are going, you have good belief system, whatever it may be, that'll support the chemicals in your
mm,
body that support the happiness, right? So it is a dual prong approach, and the reality with our happiness today is that I feel like we're usually approaching it from one side. We're always talking
mm,
about thoughts, right? Mental health has become a really big deal because we really, I think an outcome of somebody's having good mental health should be they're happy, right? Like that's in my book.
mm.
A lot of times we talk about what we avoid in mental health, but we don't talk about what does positive mental health actually look like. And to me, that's being happy is as often as you possibly can be. So what we don't talk about is how these chemicals are creating those issues. We don't talk about how nutrition impacts those chemicals, and
Mm.
then always fixate on one side. So I just wanted to bring that up out there and have people think about that and realize that happiness is not just about how you perceive things and how you think, but it is the chemicals in your body.
Yeah. Welcome, Suresh. Glad to have you with us from India. Appreciate you being here. And your comment sparks something in my thought that makes helps me express it a little more clearly. Is it's about our perception of the situation. Too many people don't consider their perception, and they just look at the circumstances without processing it, and they base their happiness on circumstances. In fact, the An interesting thing I've heard before was happiness has the same root as happening. And when our happiness is dependent on strictly on what's happening, it's a giant roller coaster ride. And we have to begin to choose in terms of our perception. And for me, the best choice is to look at our circumstances, our situation, and start with thankfulness. And when we start with thankfulness or gratitude, then it colors or flavors everything else. If we start out with complaints uh, and not liking what's going on and all that, then of course our view is going to be very negative, and we're not likely going to experience happiness, which ultimately part of it and is that happiness produces emotions, and that's what a lot of people are looking for and dependent on. And I think that we have to consider that the emotions may or may not be there in a given circumstance. It may be a choice which produces, maybe rather than producing this giddiness and laughter, that kind of emotion, but rather a contentment, a willingness to be in that circumstance and not angry, not upset, not feeling abused or whatever, not feeling like a victim. And but I liked also that you mentioned the balance that we have both physiologic as well as mental, emotional, and even spiritual inputs in determining happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about like, happening or possession, like kind of a possessive type of happiness, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
happiness is derived from possessions or successes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the biggest things that personally keeps me from being happy from thought standpoint is a constant moving target, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't like, even if I set goals, like I feel like I'm always asking more and more and more and more for myself, and in a way it's good, right? It pushes me to be better and it pushes me to be more successful, but it does keep me from being happy because instead of enjoying the fruits of my labor, I'm just going on to the next one, on to the next one, right? Maybe I wanted to improve my financial. I'm just looking back, like 'cause if you told me 5 years ago I am now where I am today where I am 5 years ago, I'd be very happy with the outcome. But very often in my life today, I'm looking at it and going, I'm not happy with this, I'm not happy with that, I'm not happy with that, and constantly moving the target of where I think I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Never, that's never going to work realistically, right? So I was honestly just meditating about it this morning, and just the word contentment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being
Yeah.
content is very important, but at the same time, like, there's the other side of it. You don't want to be so content that you're never improving your situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're lethargic. You're just sitting there doing nothing. So it's just that balance is what's going to help us to be happy. But stop moving the target, right? Like, I think that's a good practice to do is look back and ask yourself, if 10 years ago I told myself I would be here, would I be happy with my outcome then? If the answer is yes, then celebrate it and be happy about it, and stop trying to push yourself to the highest, peak of a mountain. Our society is not all about that. And the reality is the happiest people on earth. We talk about this all the time. Do you know who they are, Kev?
uh, People that, and I was just thinking of people that live in the moment.
And who does that more than anybody on earth? Because they preach this all the time.
Oh my goodness, you're.
I'm just
Um,
putting you on the spot, man. Like,
I'm drawing a blank.
monks, Buddhist monks,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Happiest, scientifically proven, happiest people on earth are monks. I think Buddhist monks, but the monks that live in Tibet, um, and they have nothing,
Right.
right? Literally not a thing. They don't possess stuff, right? That's not what they do. They live a life that's very minimalistic and super happy, right? Look around every one of your lives right now and look at all the possessions that you have. doesn't do
Yeah.
anything for us, right? So like we have to really think about, there's already an example out there of what we can do to be happy. How do we emulate it more? How do we become more like that? Because that's ultimately what it's all about. It's not about these possessions. It's not about the next biggest fridge that I'm looking at. It's not about the bigger TV, bigger house. It's that internal thing and perception. I think you hit it real well, Kevin. It's the perception of what we have, right?
Yeah.
If we're always looking at what we don't have, then that's what it's always going to feel like.
Well, and I reflect back on a mission trip I took years ago to Guatemala, and we were doing construction, and we were working in a neighborhood in Guatemala. And the one of the observations that I made was the children in this neighborhood, if you will. I use the term loosely because the standards and all very different, but the children were there playing, and the only, if you will, possession that they had that they were using was a stick, and they had taken an old sock and stuffed it with paper and whatever and made a ball. And they were throwing that around and hitting it and doing things like that, that most of us would say, oh, that's deplorable and sad and all this. But they were just very, very happy. And it wasn't because of any possession, it was because of a mindset of this is what we have, so we're going to be content with what we have and make the best of it. And I think that the concept of contentment is a huge factor as well. Because if we're always chasing the next something or the next person to feel completed or contented, we're never going to be happy. It's always going to be, as on our event registration, that's going to be that elusive bluebird of happiness. It's always going to be escaping us and becoming content with where we are, who we are, and so on. And so I really believe that's a factor that we have to consider. Welcome, Rick. Welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you guys as always, and hope you can chime in and offer your thoughts on what is happiness to you, and is it, how do you find that happiness? But so, what is going on in with us chemically, Anton? I know you really know this part, and a lot of us don't understand what is going on and what we experience in the process.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have heard the terms, right? Serotonin and neurochemicals and neurotransmitters. That's ultimately what makes us happy, right? Like when it comes down from physiological standpoint, is a certain neurotransmitter goes between the neurons and the body, creates a electromagnetic connection that needs to happen in order for those receptors to fire up, right? And those are the ones that are going, hey, we're doing great. Think about it that way, right? And that neurotransmitter is produced predominantly in our digestive system, right? It's in our gut. 80 to 90% of that substance is made in our stomach, and depends on which research study you look up. The problem is that we eat like crap. I mean, that's the reality. Especially if you live in a westernized world or in a very developed country. It doesn't have to be necessarily Western world, but a very developed country. Chances are you're eating a lot of highly processed foods that are not designed to be in our digestive system, and they're wreaking havoc on our system, especially with inflammation. And those things are causing that production of the happy chemical to go down and not be made as much of it. So society is on this antidepressant surge for the last, I don't know, 30 years, maybe a little bit more. And what are most of these antidepressants? Most of these antidepressants are SSRIs, and what it is, it has to do with the body basically signaling, saying, okay, we don't necessarily have more of this chemical in our body total, but we're going to isolate and put a lot more of what we do have remaining in the synapse gap, right into that gap to make the body make those connections and to have the positive responses. The problem is it doesn't actually increase the amount of the chemical. It just fools the body into thinking that there's more of it. And after a time, the body just gets adjusted to it, and you're no longer able to really fool it. So that's why these dosages of antidepressants constantly have to be changed and adjusted, and eventually it doesn't really work in the long run. And you become dependent on it, and it doesn't do you a favor in the long run. Now, this is to be clear. There's people that have clinical depression who absolutely need medication, and I want to put it out there that I'm not like an anti-medication person.
Mm.
But I do know many examples of people that used to be on antidepressants. We changed their lifestyle. They got off antidepressants and they feel 10 times better than they ever did on them because we actually solved the root causes of what was going on that was keeping them depressed and keeping them feeling, like they were feeling. So that's what it's all about. There's many things that you can do to support that, right? Like you can take supplements that help to build precursors, like 5-HTP5 HTP5 is a precursor to it. I can't remember the full scientific name of the supplement, but it's a precursor to that serotonin your body's gonna have the things that it needs to build it. That's the main one, right? Like there's many others that are gonna play a factor because nothing in the body acts independently. Everything's connected. So there's other neurochemicals like dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins that you're going to hear about. But predominantly serotonin is your happiness hormone, right? It's the thing that makes you feel that wholesome feeling, just where things are just good. And no matter what your brain is doing, no matter what you want it to do, no matter what you tell it to do, if that chemical is not where it needs to be, you're not going to be feeling as happy or happy, period. Right. So that's why it's a dual-sided connection. Our brain chemicals create thoughts, and our thoughts create brain chemicals, and they work together, and we need to solve the issue together.
So, there's an old saying that a way to man's happiness is through his stomach. So there may be some truth to that.
100%. No, and that's the reality. And the reason I just preach about this so much is because it's like you have to see the full picture. Like you would never have your house be burning and you only try to put out half the fire, right? Imagine that's what's happening, right? Very drastic analogy. Your happiness house is burning, but you're only looking at half of it that has to do with your thoughts, with mental health and different things like that. And you're completely avoiding the chemical pathways that are causing that fire to happen. Well, you're ever going to solve that problem? No. That side that's burning down is going to keep burning the other side. You're going to keep reigniting, keep causing issues. You really have to solve it from both ends. So if you have any sort of digestive issues where, it's you're regularly constipated, or you have very frequent bowel movements, or you have, heartburn, indigestion, gassiness, you name it, IBS, I promise you, you're not as happy as you should be or could be. And that's something that you need to address.
Welcome, Sabita. Glad to have you back. I believe you've been with us before. Good to hear from you. So, again, the whole key is that we have to really be introspective, and we have to look at all aspects of things and make adjustments and these things are all internal. It's not happiness, and this is something we see a lot of, happiness is an inside job, and it really is. We can have all the positive thoughts in the world, but until we have balance in our body and it's functioning on some level, we will not experience that sense of happiness and contentment that we're looking for, because of the interrelationship. And so as we look, we need to consider all the different facets of it. And for some of us, we may be very positive, but eating poorly. And that becomes our 10% step that we need to take. Others may be eating okay, but their mindset is really lousy. Very negative, very feeling like victim and things like that. And then even if their body is functioning well, we're going to combat it with our thoughts, our mindset.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
tell me, and this, I'm putting you on the spot here, but assuming that our body is producing the proper hormones, what happens when we do have negative thoughts physiologically, when we are focused on a negative outlook? What physiologically goes on in that case?
Well, a lot of hormones have inverse relationships, right? So like our stress hormone cortisol is has an inverse relationship with many of these neurotransmitters. So like your serotonin and dopamine and things like that. Um, there's a couple things that happen. One is in general is that inverse relationship. When one is up, it naturally causes a down regulation of the other one. So when your body's highly stressed, that feeling of being chased by a tiger all the time is kicking those stress hormones up. The other ones are going to go down. That's part of it. The other really big part is how stress impacts it. Is stress. I've talked about this a few times in the past, but um, think about stress as it puts us into a survival mechanism, right? It puts us into a survival state of being. When our body's in a survival state of being, it drives blood into extremities for survival. It's not focused on digestion. It's not focused on, those kind of breaking down food and absorbing nutrients and all that kind of stuff. It's thinking about, I need fast, easy energy to escape whatever the threat is in front of me right now. The threat could be not imminent, but your body's to a point where it feels like that is always imminent. It's that chronic stress that usually does that. And when it drives blood to extremities, where is it taking blood away from? Digestion. So your stomach functioning just goes down. And ultimately, what ends up happening is this stomach lining breaks down. And when that stomach lining breaks down, we start to create all sorts of autoimmune issues and all sorts of inflammations that your body has to deal with. So it's diverting attention from doing the things that it needs to do to optimize itself to recovering from the beat down that it's taken because of stress or because of food or because of whatever you name it. Stress and inflammation are the two main reasons why we have issues with our chemicals when we're not thinking the right way or not
Hmm.
thinking the right way, because whether you're putting those chemicals into your body to like bad stuff into your body to stress your system out, or your system is being stressed out by mental stress, it's irrelevant. It's all the same response on the inside. There's three main stressors. We only usually talk about the mental ones, but there's also the physical and the oxidative, right? So the physical stressors are your lack of sleep, too much work, too much exercise sometimes can be that as well.
Mm.
And then the oxidative one is going to be the chemicals. Really, that's the worst one. That's the unseen one. That's all the stuff that we absorb through our skin and things like that, that are not supposed to be in our body or in quantities that it is in our body. All of that is going to make those chemicals go down.
Zaid has a comment, and he says, I would also add understanding one's own self. Who am I? How am I wired, etc., are some components of happiness, along with other physical and physiological components. Um, Definitely, uh, that affects and drives our mindset, our thoughts, our uh, the stories that we tell ourselves are all part of that, which factor into this. The other thing that struck me, and I think for somebody like me who likes to find that plug in formula and put everything in place and say, okay, I'm done and I'm going to move forward, that this is not a static process. It's an ongoing process that we have to be aware of, and looking at the various inputs into our life, whether it's mental inputs, whether it's emotional inputs, physical inputs. They're all a part of what's going on, and we can't just get to a point, because life changes around us, environment factors change, and so this thing that we're going to find a place of happiness is kind of foolish, because we don't live in a static world. We don't have the same thing every day, so that one thing that we do, one decision, one thought, one eating approach, that any one of those we can just do it and that's going to fix everything. It's not a static process. It's something that we have to be aware of on an ongoing basis, and we have to make it a priority to consider it on a I would suggest at least daily, if not hourly basis, that we've got to be aware of what's going on with us, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of it. Is that fair?
No, absolutely. And I love Zaid's point on identity. I think that's one of the bigger ones that gets in the way of our happiness from a thought standpoint. Um, so many things boil down to that, right? Because you feel like you got to a new place, right? The external environment has changed. You're making more money. You got a bigger house. Those things are temporary because they work because momentarily or for a short period of time, they make you think differently about who you are, right? That's the reality. I think that's what it boils down to. That big
Yeah,
house doesn't actually bring happiness. The big house makes you change the way you feel about who you are as a
that's
person,
right.
where you rank in the order of things and all that kind of stuff. But then the what happens is we reset the perception, right? That house, now we're not longer starting to look at great, we have this house. Now we're like, oh, but look at these other bigger houses that people have that I don't have, right? And once again, we're in the same level where we were with a smaller house before. It just very short lived. That perception of
Hmm.
self that's driven by external things is always a short lived perception. And that's why those things can never bring us long term happiness. They can bring short term happiness. So yeah, 100% Zayda. Identity is so important. So much of our thought is spent on who we are. We don't realize how much we think about who we
Hmm.
are and how we fit into our world and around us, and how much that can create stress. I would say for 99% of us, our identity is a stressor.
Mm,
That's the
right.
reality that I live.
Because of our discontentment with where we are based on what we think we should be, who we are, and so on. Yeah, it's a constant struggle against what we think and who we think we are. And
We're constantly looking for what we don't have, right? We're always looking to fill the gaps and thinking the happiness comes from filling those gaps. There's always going to be new gaps.
mm,
It comes from perception of celebrating the ones we've already filled in, right? The ones that we didn't have filled in before and we did fill in, or the ones that we're blessed to never had to have fill in,
mm.
right? The ones that we were just granted from birth or from privilege or from wherever it came from. And that's not how we are designed to think. We're designed to think of reaching for the next big thing. And that just is designed to push us down.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that about that, and how do we um, avoid that or counter that? And I don't know that we can avoid it, but how do we counter that? And you know, I think through about our perception of what we're owed. You know, I think we're driven by, well, another house, because somehow we think we're owed that, either doing that for ourselves or somebody else doing it for us, that we're owed these things. So I think, like going back to your monk reference, that we need to realize that the basics of life, okay, something to eat, and nutrition, and uh, clothes, and shelter. If we set our expectation that that is all we need, that changes things. When we realize that we don't have to have all these things to have life, we can, again, monks have those basic things, but beyond that, they're not even thinking about having any of the other things because it's not of value or not of importance in based on what they've chosen. And so the more we can uh, set our expectations that anything beyond nutrition, shelter, uh, is extra. And when we also recognize those things are fleeting, because you see people that have this amazing job with these pay, high pays scale and all this stuff, and they seemingly are happy, and then something happens, economy happens, health happens, then all of a sudden they go, this isn't it. And we end up getting to that point because we're forced to, versus making a choice to get to that point. And I think that's a value, is when we start looking at that and reset what is important, what is our priority. And that takes effort because we're so affected by the culture we live in that it creates real challenges, like you said, because we're always looking for that next something. Whereas we say, hey, I have food, shelter, and clothing. Beyond that, it's a blessing. And so setting our expectations is a big factor, I would say.
No, absolutely. I would say one thing is big factor, and it's a very beaten down, piece of information. Being present is one of the best things you can do for your happiness from
Mm,
a thought perspective, right? Not from a chemical it does help chemically too, but I mean, like, primarily from thought perspective. Because the reality is, like, if you think about it, if you're truly in the moment, you have food, you have shelter, you have the things that Kevin mentioned are necessities, right? But when we go in that moment, even if it's like you don't have the greatest house, but you have a roof over your head, the thing that'll make you feel not good about your house is removing yourself from that moment and going into
mm,
another moment where you have to compare, right? Because
hmm
you have to go out of that moment to have some sort of a benchmark against your friend's house, against your neighbor's house, against somebody else's house, or whatever it may be, but against the house you used to have, right? You remove yourself from that moment to make the comparison, and that's where you go wrong. If you are truly staying in the moment that you're in, all of us watching this, because I know you have electricity in order to watch this show, um, and if you're paying for LinkedIn and electricity, chances are you at least got food, right? Like, just, I'm assuming that. Hopefully, I'm not wrong, but we have all those things. So in the moment, we can't be unhappy with what we have or don't have. It's when we get out of that moment that's what that happens. If you notice yourself doing that, bring it back in, bring it back to the current moment, observe the environment, observe, the senses that you're experiencing, and remove yourself from that other place that you went to make the comparison.
Yeah. Welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you. Appreciate you being here at all. That's great. Rick makes a very salient comment as well. Accept the fact that nothing material here stays with us in eternity. We go like we came, with nothing except our soul. And I really think that he brings out another point about happiness, is that we look at life in terms of eternity. And when we look at life in terms of eternity, in other words, beyond the physical life here on earth, we realize that even the physical life is not the answer, that there is more to it, and that more is related to non tangibles. And when we set that expectation, we came into the world with nothing, and we leave the world with nothing, even leaving the world physically. And so, as we prioritize the condition of our soul and spirit, we're going to have a better chance of understanding the narrative, living in the present, because when we say, okay, I've got my basic needs, then I can be content in the moment. And so I'm not always chasing that something else. And so I think that's a very important point to consider in terms of happiness, is as we look at life in that much bigger picture, then it brings everything into a better focus, if you will, in terms of priority. Um, did you want to comment on that one, Anton?
No, I like no. You're spot on. I'm reading Zaid's comment about, if I may add one point, not to listen to society message of if I can do it, then you can do it. Children hear that slogan from youth, and that is supposed to encourage, but also pull individuals down. And yeah, I think that's it. Like, right, like parents want better things for their kids, right? They want them to have what parents didn't have, but we don't focus on our kids being happier than we were, right? Like we think that them having the possessions, we're doing good for them as parents, but we're really preconditioning them for failure because we're putting that next big thing, bigger house, bigger job, bigger car into their heads from a very, very early age. And yeah, no, we need to stop doing that. I agree.
Yeah, and uh, I have to always go back that we recognize the value of what the Bible brings us, and it talks a great deal about uh, thinking in terms of not just this life. It characterizes this life as a vapor, as a moment, and then also just renewing our mind. You know, and when we let others condition our mind, whatever means that comes through, and whether it's listening to other people talk, ones that we don't think about that factor in is the music we listen to and expose ourselves to, the TV that we watch, the people we hang out with are all inputting into our life. And if we make wrong choices in regards to that, we're setting ourselves up to not have that perspective and that moment of where we should be content and what our needs are versus what our wants. And so again, just avoiding looking around and going, well, they have this or they can do that, or so. Um, Bottom line, comparison is really a big enemy to us being able to find happiness. Um, and it's interesting. You talk about the gut and the factor there. We even do that with our food. Oh, well, these people eat caviar all the time. So that must mean that because they have all this other stuff, that must mean that they're have figured out the sense of happiness for themselves. So since I don't have caviar, I'm not going to be happy. And I know that's kind of an extreme example, but even looking at food and levels of value of food uh, is a real challenge. Welcome, Eunice. Always glad to have you with us. And so we just comparison is a really bad thing to do, and it affects us physiologically, it affects us mentally and emotionally. So avoiding comparison goes a long way. And like you said, one of those keys is living in the moment, being present in the moment that we're living then. Let's see. Sharon has a comment. I appreciate that Sharon likes to share from her experience, which is really good. Um, Said, I had that happen to me when I was much younger. A manager that I had was so terrible. I got promoted to a new position and I was having a hard time learning it. Every night she would make it a habit when no one was around saying to me, you can't learn, you're stupid and dumb. Well, after hearing that every day, I started to believe it. And what did I do? I cried. After a while, I really believed I couldn't do it, even though I probably could have done it if she had. Uh oh. let's see if I can.
Hold on. If she had more faith in me and trained me the right way, it was horrible.
Yeah. And so that input from other people really can make a huge difference. And I know that current circumstances, this it may sound extreme, but I'm beginning to realize people uh, are so caught up in their job and what they make, and that being their ticket, that they're afraid to leave that job if it's unhealthy for them. And that's unfortunate because, we spend a lot of time in our jobs and we stay in them because of fear of what if, what will happen if I quit this job. Well, one of the things that we know will happen if you don't and you're in that type of environment is you're going to be unhealthy and you're going to not be happy. You're going to have problems. So at some point you go, okay, my well-being and uh, is more important than any of these other things, because if I don't take care of my well-being, these other things aren't going to matter. Because if we get to a point mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually that we are so unhealthy we can't function, nothing else matters. It doesn't make a difference.
No, absolutely. And that happiness takes work. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, it takes work. It's not. I don't think it's natural to experience life and just be happy. I don't believe that. I think there's too much trauma. I think there's too much events that happen, too many events that happen that we have to work through and, adjust our perception of things based on how they happen. And, you know, it just takes work. So if you feel like, oh no, I'm never going to be happy, or, judging yourself based on it, don't think there's something wrong with you. We're all struggling with happiness. The majority of us, the vast majority of us, are really struggling with it. And I think certain ones that are like making it seem like they're always happy, they're just putting on a little bit of an act, because they feel like that's the show they have to put on. That's who they have to be. So don't think even those people that are always walking around and smiling that they're happiest ever. That they may look like that doesn't mean they're not struggling with some of the same things that you're struggling with. So put in the work. Put in the work on your thoughts. Put in the work on your identity, putting the work on your internal health, your digestion, things like that, putting good nutrients into your system, good building blocks for your body to build with, and you'll get better. That's the thing about it.
Yeah. Well, you make the comment, the thought process of I will never be happy is not healthy, but the converse thought is just as dangerous, is that I'll always be happy or I should always be able to be happy. Happiness is not even a guaranteed something. And I would even go so far uh, to say that if all we are ever doing is chasing happiness, and that we are likely never going to find it, that we take a mindset of happiness is not something I chase to find. It is more about us focus on living and being who we are. And when we do that, if you will, happiness is going to find us, because again, the old saying, the referencing the elusive bluebird of happiness. The reason it's elusive is too many people are chasing too hard rather than being and let it find us. And as I was saying that, the thought comes to mind when, and again, I may be getting out there a little bit, but birds, if you're ever interested in getting up close to a bird, the last thing you need to do is chase it. But when you are in the moment and even still, the potential is a bird will light on your hand, your shoulder, your head, whatever. But I think there's a principle involved there, is that don't focus on trying to be happy. Focus on being who we are and by our design, which includes healthy eating. It includes healthy perspectives on what's important, what we value, and even what we deserve. It is real common saying that we all deserve to be happy. I don't know that I think I understand the intent of the comment, but I think it's a misguided thought. We are designed to be who we are, and when we're doing that and being that, then happiness will come to us. Um, so,
I think like it's funny to hear the people say that you deserve to be happy. I think that's wrong. And once again, I never thought about it that way, but it feels like you it's something that is earned, right?
yeah,
It's like you earn happiness, so now you can deserve it. Well, no, you will never earn happiness. It's not something that's earned. It's not something that is accomplished. It's not, as we've talked about through the show over and over and over. If you're chasing it, it's a temporary thing, right?
mm,
Without ever getting it, you'll feel closer to it. You'll feel like, oh, I'm better than I was before temporarily, and then you'll be right back where you started. So it's not something you earn, it's something that you really choose, and it's something you protect. It's already inside you. So now it's just about protecting it and allowing it to shine from within without the cloudiness of whether it be your chemicals or your thoughts.
well, and I know I beat this drum regularly, but I think it's a drum that needs to be beat, and that is a factor in this is recognizing that um, we have innate value, that it nothing we can do to make it better or worse. It's there because we're created valuable, all of us, every one of us. That is the equality we share as human beings, is that we all have great value, not by what we do, not by what we don't do, not by our circumstances, not anything. It's there. And the sooner we can accept that value, okay, and be content with that value, then the rest of things begin to take in on the right perspective, the right priority. And I think that's part of why an eternal perspective makes a difference, because part of the value that we experience is factors into how we spend our eternity. And uh, and so again, I really hope one day, and I'm still trying to understand and make it a part of my thought process, that my value was isn't earned by me, so I can't lose it. It wasn't given to me by someone else, so they can't take it away. It is given to us by our creator, and because of the nature of our creator, there he's not going to take it away. We have that value. It's an established thing. And I think a lot of us, uh, in chasing happiness, are really trying to fulfill that value and that we feel. And we can't change that. It is what it is. And soon as we can go, okay, I don't have to prove my worth. I don't have to find my value. That's done. Then that frees us to go, okay, so I have that great value. What can I use that in myself and who I'm made to be to live and do what is best? Let's see. Um, okay, Zaid has a comment. Uh, Hedonistic kind of happiness in the world, material possessions is an illusion. That would drive people crazy because it is not out there in its euphoric status. It should be drawn from something that has a much higher status, like faith, I agree. That value of that faith is so important. And because of the faith, we can then begin to appreciate and accept the value that we have. Um, when we quit trying to prove our worth, then it sure helps anyway in not doing comparison. We do comparison because we're still trying to figure out that we're worthwhile, that we have value. We don't need to do that. And so I think that is another core part of of being happy. And I think we use the phrase being happy for a reason, because it's not about doing.
No, absolutely. And folks, again, thank you all so much for sharing your personal experience, sharing your thoughts, Aid. All of you. I mean, I'm trying to see who else shared. Rick, as always, thank you all so much. Like, we talk about some personal things, right? We talk about some things that people don't always want to put out there. They don't want to put out when they were hurt. They want to put out when they struggled. But bringing these things into light, it just helps others. It helps others to see that, this social media thing is not what it is, right? We all have struggles. We all struggle with happiness. Every single one of us struggles with happiness. I guarantee it. So give yourself a break, but at the same time, have a plan on how you're going to address both your thoughts and your chemicals, because we all, should be happy. That's, instead of deserve happiness, I think we should all be happy. Use the word should, because I think that's the reality. It's all within us. Reset your benchmarks of what you're measuring yourself against. Stop going outside of your current moment, and things will get better day by day.
It helps us to make the best choices when we're not making choices with the wrong priority. And it will make a difference. And again, remember, happiness is not a state of a static state. Happiness um, is something that we've always got to consider as we go through life and find the balance that we need moment by moment, day by day. We got to quit operating an autopilot, because there is no magic autopilot that works for us or anyone else, whether it's money, whether it's circumstances. It doesn't work. That there is not a magic pill for that. There is principles in life, and the choices we make moment by moment with each moment we live in. All right. Well, Anton, I think we've pretty well covered the topic today, and we will revisit with everyone next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. As always, look forward to hearing your comments, thoughts, and if you have a topic that you would like to have addressed by us, we're happy to do it. Not that we have all the answers, but we have learned how to ask some of the right questions along the way. So thank you, everyone. Anton, any other closing comment?
Nope. That's kind
Okay.
of covered everything. Just always grateful for you all. Thank you so much for joining.
God bless you. See you next Tuesday, 8 o'clock Eastern. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.